Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Empowering Musicians podcast. And I'm your host, Michael Manley, and I'm a musician, arts and labor advocate, writer, and French horn player. And I'm here today welcoming my good friend Chuck McGuire, who's going to talk to us all about how he is building the musical community in Las Vegas and Henderson, Nevada. So welcome to the show, Chuck.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited about the conversation. So this is going to be fun.
Great. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to Las Vegas? And you're an amazing musician, conductor, and educator, and you do all of those things here. So tell us a little about your story and how you got here and ended up doing what you're doing.
Well, so the interesting thing is I graduated from the University of Alabama with my master's degree in wind band conducting. I had taught for 5.5 years. I didn't really have a plan, but my professors encouraged me to go off to grad school and pursue a DMA in conducting. And then I applied for 5 schools. I got into all 5 schools, which is very exciting. But at the end of the day, UNLV and Tom Leslie drew me in to coming to the Valley and to study at UNLV with him. And so that actually got me out here. UNLV wasn't my first choice, but after having conversations with the faculty in the department and one of my mentors, Robert W. Smith, he said, you really just need to go out there and study. So that's how I ended up in Vegas, and I've just not left for various reasons.
That's great. And that's how I was connected to you through your conducting, and you have a broad organization called Making Music Matter Foundation, one of the initiatives of which is a wind orchestra called Desert Winds. Can you tell us a little bit about Making Music Matter Foundation and how that came about?
Absolutely. So after I finished all my coursework at UNLV, I was hired to conduct a 90-piece orchestra. I was told there's this 90-piece orchestra in Summerlin, Nevada, way up there. It's still Las Vegas, but it's the Summerlin area inside a church. And it's just this incredibly large, amazing community orchestra. And I wanted to stay active as I was getting ready to write my dissertation back in 2009. So I took over this orchestra, and the string players never showed up. There were 5 string players and 10 wind players, but the string section never showed up. So we were going back and forth between canceling the season, getting rid of this orchestra, or salvaging the best part of it. So I just decided, you know what, we're going to take these 10 players. We're going to do music written for 10 players, 8 to 10 players, octets, dectets. And so we did that. We did an entire season of programming. We had arrangements done for the group. So Desert Winds actually started as a chamber group coming out of an orchestra in 2009. And in 2009, all of the housing market had crashed in 2007 into 2008. It hit Vegas later than it did the rest of the country because people had already booked their vacations. So the downward turn in the economy at that time in Vegas was a little slower, but then it hit really hard. And so a lot of these players just moved away. There was no way for them to work. And so the community itself broke down. So Desert Winds was born out of that. The second year, we just decided to go with a full wind ensemble setup. It was a community band at that time. And, here we are in 2022 with a semi-professional ensemble. Half of the musicians do get paid in the ensemble, and we want to get it to the point where all of them are getting paid. And so when we were part of different community organizations, nonprofits, we were under an umbrella, if you will, to take care of our financials and all of that. But in 2018, we decided to go ahead and create our own nonprofit, which was the Making Music Matter Foundation. Because at that point, we had a high school honor winds. We had a camp that we had rolled out. We had multiple initiatives that did not fit under the name Desert Winds, right? We didn't want to name the camp Desert Winds Camp. We wanted it to be a separate thing so that we could have different stakeholders within the music education community becoming part of the organization. This is not supposed to be one conductor leading everything. This is about a team of musicians fostering community. And so from the beginning of the inception of Making Music Matter Foundation, we have sought to bring in many different partners and people from the community so that we can start to establish something. And so the overall purpose is just building community within musicianship, within our music community in Vegas. So,
yeah, I think that's really important, and my interest is very much aligned with that. I mean, I lived in Las Vegas around that time, 2009, for a few years, and I was doing a show here, and I noticed when our show closed, most everybody, including myself, just scattered, right? And Las Vegas is like such a vibrant city. It's got an amazing food scene, for example, and there's like this amazing community of people in the food and beverage world who are able to thrive here and build and devote their time to their art. I really do think food is an art, and we need a similar kind of infrastructure for music and visual arts and everything else. And building that out, I think is really fundamental, because often people don't think about this, but it's like when you're looking for somebody to teach your kid a clarinet lessons or violin lessons, you're not going to have those people living in your city if they can't make a living doing what they love. So often the life of a musician is doing 10 or 12 different jobs, right? They might play in your ensemble and 3 other ensembles and teach a course in music theory or music history at a college. And that's just kind of this patchwork way. But the more of those opportunities that are there, the more people can actually set down roots.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's when coming from Alabama, I grew up in Alabama, and the aspect of community in every area was so important. But most importantly, the directors, the band directors, the choir directors, the music. We don't have a lot of orchestras in Alabama, but the music teachers worked closely together. They were in each other's band rooms. They were rehearsing each other's kids. The university concerts are full. People are attending the University of Alabama, Troy University, Auburn University. So those campuses have full programming that goes on year round. There's 2 or 3 concerts going on every single week. There's multiple events for the community, and it's just a matter of the university setting and the educational setting is the center of community in every aspect of what you do. And so when I moved out here, that part of it wasn't there. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why we are striving so hard to build out the Making Music Matter Foundation. It's just a matter of bringing community. Directors just really are protective of the students they have, and they have to understand there's an entire community. We will help you. We will work with you. We will do whatever it takes to make sure that we prepare musicians to go off into the world and make a difference in whatever career path they choose. And the main initiative for me has been to get away from telling students they need to major in music. The idea that we should all major in music. Musicians need to be found in every aspect in a community. Your dentists, your doctors, your lawyers, your garbage man. Everybody should have been touched by music and art at some point in their life, and they need to have just a general understanding of it. And I think building a robust community of people that are willing to consume music, then it turns us around to being able to look at entrepreneurship. Because in college, if you major in music, unless you go to a specialized program, you're not getting entrepreneurship. You're not getting the ability to build out jobs. Musicians, you and I have talked about this. Musicians, I want to get paid. 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 Okay, have you ever thought about how that works and how you get paid? Have you thought about the back end of it? And I know that you've been on the back end of things before with Making Music Matter. So you understand the business side of it. And musicians are not trained in business. Right. We don't know much about business. I do not know much about business, but I know that something has to be paid. Somebody is paying for everything, and nothing is actually free. It does get paid for. And so I just believe that by building a vibrant community of musicianship, where our students, our families are trained in the art of music, they listen, they understand how to consume music, they're more willing to support the jobs and the money that it takes to fund positions in music. Not to go too deep into this, but the reason we know so much about the Renaissance, that period of time in history, is because of the art and the music that's left over. It tells this story of those people and how they lived, and some of the stories in the music are just so hilarious. They're just incredibly like, man, that song is about that. And I'm not going to go into the details of those songs, but I just think making sure that we return the art to our humanity. I think during the pandemic, everybody started consuming art and music at a higher level and didn't realize that it's people like you and I and our colleagues that made the world a better place for them when the pandemic hit, right? Same thing happened during the Spanish flu. The orchestras and the musicians and the artists were there. And as soon as the pandemic's over, everybody forgets that the musicians were creating all of this content for, and the movies and the TV shows, the Netflix and all of that. It takes money, and it takes training, and it takes an investment in something that's just very, very, very inherent. We're all inherently very creative, yet it's the one thing that we cut first. We think we don't need to pay for it. And that's not just in schools, it's in every aspect, right? We'll cut a show from a casino and replace it with some random card trick guy that's hot right now. And it's just an incredible turn of events. You know, we have performance, we have education, we have community. All of these things have to start working together so that we can actually have a more robust sense. Because I want musicians to get paid. You want musicians to get paid. But that's the ultimate thing. But if we don't build in the tradition of music and art consumption in our students and in our families, we will never have that. If you look at Texas, something really people talk about, oh, the schools, the bands, the orchestras, they're all so good. Well, they're good because of support. They're good because they have community. It's not because they have better teachers. It's not because but they have funded systems in place that take care of those students. Dallas Wind Symphony concerts are sold out. People go to those concerts. They consume that because the families have a tradition of creating and being a part of the artistic community. Whether they go off to be a doctor and they played in high school band, or their grandparents were in band, and there's this trumpet, this Stradivarius trumpet that's being passed down from grandpa to dad down to the son. Like there's so much tradition there. We lack that. And at some point in time, we're going to have to start that. And I think that's basically where Making Music Matter Foundations come in. Whether the community likes it or not, we're going to build some tradition, and we're going to build some community, and we're not going to apologize about it. We're just going to do it. So that's kind of, yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I know, I remember hearing years ago about how Major League Baseball, for example, funds the creation of baseball diamonds. They build them all over the country, and their goal is not to create professional baseball players. Their goal is to create super fans for baseball who are then going to buy tickets to baseball. Right. And so they're thinking structurally like this, and across different age groups and everything else. And I do think that I'm not sure the Metropolitan Opera is doing that. Like, how are they ensuring that somebody who's 12 is going to become somebody who loves opera? And I think that's where the arts could really do a better job. But to that end, you are taking on the role of creating a kind of a unique band camp in Las Vegas and Henderson called Band Camp Reimagined, and that is an initiative of Making Music Matter Foundation. So in terms of building that baseball diamond, how are you trying to create that that music lover or that patron in the future through Band Camp Reimagined?
Well, so in my mind, this may not be written down anywhere. I don't think I've ever written this down, but the principle for me is improving the type of teacher that teaches in our community. And that's not an improvement of their person or an improvement of their ability to teach, but a student that has graduated out of our schools them returning back to the community, that is the single most important aspect of this entire hierarchy of how we build out community. Is, are the musicians and the people that move off for college, are they returning to help us create a better future for our robust music community? That's the most important part. And through Bandcamp Reimagined, we have introduced, a couple of years ago, before the pandemic, we started teaching conducting to high school students. This year, we're offering composition and theory, because most schools in Clark County do not offer the AP Music Theory, and nobody ever does a deep dive into composition. So students should be introduced to that, because we need composers that are writing music and new music that honestly reflects our time, almost like the Renaissance, when all that music and that art, it reflected the people. We need people writing music now. And how do we have that if we send them to college and they've never been introduced to it? And then they decide in their second year of college, you know what, I'm going to be a composer. Why not let them know that, expose them to that in high school? We cover special topics. There are over 50 vibrant careers in music that have nothing to do with teaching. 50, there's 50 plus. And they pay as much, if not more, than teaching positions sometimes. And I don't want people to not teach. I want people to still teach, but there's so many things that people can do within a community, and a community needs these music students that have this training. They need them to come back and return to the community so they can deliver in other ways. But there are many different ways a person can make money and different careers. But it's a matter of exposing students in our camp to those different careers. So at the end of the day, there's a band concert. There are 3 groups that are going to perform. There's a beginning band. We call it Beginning Band Plus. So it's any kid that has had beginning band for this past year. We do an advanced middle school, and then we do a high school band. And so the primary event is the concert with those students after they've worked on music for the week. But the underlying ideas and principles, why Bandcamp for us is reimagined, is we're taking careers that get established in college, and we're trying to establish them in high school and expose students to it. And, high schools don't have resources to put into composition and theory and conducting and all of these different aspects. So that's why, as a community partner with our schools, we can offer that to our students. Chamber music. A majority of ours you'll actually be teaching the chamber music sequence. Most of our schools in town do not expose their students to chamber music, or they hear it at maybe at Command Performance at Allstate, but a lot of the schools are not doing chamber music. They did some of it more, I think, more or less because of the pandemic. They had to have smaller groups and stuff, but it was a forced thing. And chamber music's an incredible part of what we do. And it's the very first musicians and groups of musicians were in tiny little bands that would travel around and play. So it's important that we expose our students and our musicians and our community to every single, as much as we can, of what it means to be a musician and or a consumer of musician in some way, or music in some way. So
yeah, and I think that's really important. And one of the things that I'm focused on is the idea of the mindset of musicians, right? And this idea that, like, I think we come up as musicians with this idea that unless we are performing music entirely as our career, that somehow we're no longer musicians, right? So somebody might become a doctor who is like a really avid painter, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm a painter. But somebody who's a doctor who studied music will say, I used to be a clarinet player, right? Versus holding on to that idea that I am a musician, regardless of whether or not I'm playing. Somebody who's a doctor or a successful businessman or lawyer, or, they can contribute in profound ways to the building of arts in their community, through donations and through other things. And that's as important as playing an instrument, right? Because without that, you can't do the others. So I do think that there is this idea that, like, we can be musicians without necessarily making music, right? Like with an instrument, that there's many ways to sort of see yourself as an artist and still play vocationally, you know, at times. I think a lot of people think, I didn't study cello as a child, so there's no way I could pick it up as an adult. And there's all this baggage that we have around what it means to be an artist. And I think it's really important that you're focused on broadening that.
Yeah, because art, I mean, I tell people this. Felicia Rashad most recently gave a speech, and I don't know what university it was. I think it might have been Howard. And this has stuck with me. So when you're a baby, you're born into the world, and babies learn to walk from their parents and how their parents walk, right? So they have a certain gait based on what their parents teach them. But before a baby ever learns to walk, they're waddling, and they're kind of moving, and they're dancing to their heartbeat, right? So a baby is dancing before they ever learn to walk. So when a baby is cooing and then singing intervals as they're trying to copy language from their mom, they're singing actual intervals. You could go to the piano and play what a baby's singing. So before a baby ever learns to speak a word and we put them into the system of language, they were inherently an artist because they were singing. And if a baby gets a hold of a pencil or a pen and they start writing all over the wall, it doesn't look like art to you, but it is a very early stage of artistic expression just from drawing. And then we force them into a system of learning how to write. So we are all inherently artistic, but our systems and our world spends a lot of time removing that artistic aspect from us. And I think, you know, whether it be governments and religion or whatever you may think about, we are less artistic than we were born to be. Even you and I, as trained musicians, as much as we've trained, we have to work very hard getting back to a place. We were singing, you and I were singing when we were babies, but now we've worked our entire lives to get back to a point that was inherently part of our brain, and then we were rewired to do other things. And so I think we just all have to remember that we were born to be artists. And instead of trying to tear down and reduce the importance of art, I think we should embrace it, right? I know for a fact that test scores go up. We love to talk about test scores in schools, but I know for a fact through rhythm reading and audiation with students in 5th grade, I know that their data scores go up. I know that they're performing higher than any of their colleagues on the standardized test. And they come out of that 5th grade year being way more empathetic, and they're just little adults. And I call them little adults in training. And so it's just really interesting. I think if we could just all remember and really marvel, and next time you see a baby, just marvel at the miracle, right? The miracle of a child, but the miracle is actually in how much they can do. They are born into this world, and we don't notice these things, but they're so critically important to our humanity. They are the thread of artistic expression runs through us, and we need to just get back to that. We need to be okay with that and just start embracing it.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked a lot about Bandcamp. It's called Bandcamp Reimagined is your program. Yes. One of the things that I remember is growing up was I had a choice of, you know, band camp for me was marching band, right? Like summer band where we had to practice marching down the street. And I had this really interesting experience where I wanted to go to a summer band camp that was more for concert band. And this was, I think, right before my 9th grade year. So I was starting high school, and it turned out that it conflicted with marching band, summer marching band. Right. So my mom, being the creative person she is, or she was rather, found out that there was an orchestra camp right before. And so she's like, well, maybe you can go to this one instead, and that way it doesn't conflict. And so I spent that summer, you know, for 2 weeks, I was at this orchestra camp, and it was like mind blowing because I'd never played with strings before. I'd never played this repertoire, and you know, the music was amazing. And then I went right from there to marching camp, and I was like, oh, this is a drag. And so, but but like for most kids, like there are these great programs at Interlochen and the Tanglewood BUTI program, and they're very exclusive, they're very expensive. And your program is really more about reaching as many students as possible and also making it accessible. So can you talk a little bit about how you're doing that?
Well, from day one, in 2017, when we met to sit down and talk about doing this, John Seaton is the associate conductor of Desert Winds and education advisor for Making Music Matter Foundation. When we sat down to talk about doing this, it started with just high school. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure we did was that we didn't worry about the money. Now, we always have to worry about the money from a business side, right? We want to worry about them. We have to pay for things, right? Camp is very expensive. Rental of facilities, paying for special conductors to come in, all of that is something I have to think about as director of the camp. But I never wanted a family to be turned away because they couldn't afford it, right? And so we have, I'm looking at the list, we have about 35 to 40 students who signed up for camp this year that are fully scholarshiped. And again, we have to pay for that, but we will never turn a child or a family away because they cannot afford it. Some families have paid what they could. We have multiple ways to mitigate financial distress on a family because the community is for everybody, right? If we really want to build community, we've got to reduce these barriers, right? Am I happy with where we are? I'm happy that kids are not having to pay for camp, but now we have a busing issue. We have a situation where we can't get kids from all over the valley to come to camp. So we have to look at ways to mitigate transportation and make sure that that is something that we can offer in the future coming out of the pandemic, because there are students, it doesn't matter that we can't pay for that the student can't pay, they don't have to pay for camp. That doesn't matter. It matters they just can't get to camp, right? There's no transportation for them. So there's lots of things and thoughts in the works of trying to reduce the barriers that are set up. And so, but the one thing that we have always done is make sure that a child is not turned away because they can't afford camp. So I'm proud of that, but that's not as far as we need to go. We've got further to go as far as taking care of that. So, and we're committed to doing that. So,
yeah, that's great. And you teach at a school called Pinecrest, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And you have a great program there. And one of your young students decided to try to help out in this way, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. So this was a tough year for all teachers. And I run around from multiple schools. So I teach for the Pinecrest Academy system. I oversee music at 3 of the campuses within the Conservatory at Pinecrest. And my official title is the director of the conservatory. But you're going through the day, you're teaching, and there are good days and there are bad days, and then there's just one day, this kid came up, and his name's Josh, and he asked me if he could, for his bar mitzvah project, if he could raise money for kids. And what he said to me was, I would like to raise money for kids that can't afford camp so that they can go to camp with me. And I, stone faced, looked at him and was like, what? Really? You want? Oh, okay. That sounds like a good idea. And then as soon as he walked out of the room, I started sobbing. I couldn't. I mean, it was just. He was a 7th grader, and just deciding to take such a monumental moment in his journey in his Jewish faith to use that moment to raise money for kids that are less fortunate than him. I just couldn't, and I still haven't reconciled how a 7th grader comes to that place. It has to have a lot to do with home training. His parents must be absolutely incredible, which they are. At some point, he must have been inspired by a concert or something that we've done with Making Music Matter Foundation. I don't know what the spark was, and I haven't asked him, because even if I talked to him about it today, I would get emotional talking about it. And so when he presented the check for the money that he's raising, he's still raising money for it. when he presented the check to our president, she also got emotional. It's just really impactful. And I tell people all the time, kids are capable of changing the world. They're little adults in training. All that means is we want to train them to be really good, self-sufficient adults, but they get to fail because they're kids, and we want to remember that they're kids. And sometimes kids will just surprise you. They come up with this idea and they're impacting their world in the 7th grade, making a big difference. And Josh may or may not meet those students that have benefited from his fundraiser. I don't know. It was incredibly moving, and it's a memory that I will carry with me for the rest of my days. It's very inspiring. It helps me feel like the work is working and the work is worth it, right?
Yeah.
So it's because it gets hard sometimes. You feel like you're on an island, and okay, so we've got to get camp out there. We've got to get the numbers up, and you look out and there's hundreds of music teachers in town, and how many of them actually get together and talk and have conversations and decide where we want our music community to go? Because they're all stakeholders in it. They all have a role to play in that. But if it's not an effort that is unified, it will not have the impact that it needs. And it just goes back to comparing us to Texas. I know a lot of my colleagues don't want to talk about that, but we've had directors move to Texas. And the thing that they talk about, they were teaching in Vegas and they moved to Texas, and they're better directors in Texas than they were here because of the support mechanism and the desire and need to really impact a community. And all of those directors talk, they hang out, they go to dinner, they show up in each other's band rooms, they rehearse each other's bands. We have such a small amount of that happening. There's a little bit, but I mean, we have so many talented people. We need to start working together and building that community, and so that we have more Joshes, right?
Yeah.
So Josh is the future. He has just done his first session of philanthropy in the 7th grade.
Yeah.
He's already given to our music program. And so you look out into the sea of people, we need more Joshes, and we need more kids touched by what music education does, right? What the process does. And so their hearts need to be filled by the inspiration of what's happening. And the big thing here is, don't treat our kids like they need to be music majors. They don't. We want some of them to be, obviously, but give them the opportunity to grow and consume and create and support as when they become adults. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how can anybody listening support what Josh is doing with this band camp?
So the website is makingmusicmatterfoundation.org. You can go there. There's a donate button. So any of our donations through the website right now are going to camp. We have 35 to 40 students that are scholarships, but at this point we haven't paid for all of those students, right? We hope and dream and pray that we will get to that point. But those kids are still coming to camp regardless. We're going to make it happen. We do not make profit off of camp. We are a nonprofit. I think that's very important, is that every single dollar that goes to camp. So Michael, you and I are now debating on how many people we can bring in just for camp. So being able to support every kid that attends camp allows us to amplify the reach of camp. So Michael, you're in charge of chamber music. There are some people we want to bring in, and it's going to cost us money to expose the children to those teachers and those musicians, these professional musicians in town. But we have to compensate them for their time. And so that's just the give and take of having to build this up. So, but they can go to makingmusicmatterfoundation.org and click on the donate button. Anything donated within the next 2 months goes towards camp. So
great. And when is camp? And we're also planning a concert in conjunction with camp as well.
Oh yeah. So camp is June 20th through the 25th. So we have 5 days of intense training and conducting and theory, and then rehearsals in the afternoon. And so it's just going to be a really, really fun time. The Saturday, the 25th, is all of the concerts for the bands that have been rehearsing all week. And then on Friday night, we have what we generally call the gala concert. This year, it's a little bit different just because we moved camp up. It conflicts with a few things. So some of our professional musicians are out of town, but Desert Winds is doing a concert called Desert Winds Deconstructed. So essentially, it's taking the different sections and the different aspects of the ensemble and reducing it down to chamber setup, but not just chamber music. It's essentially going to show the history and the etymology, if you will, of the different instruments and how they function together and the history of how it came about. It's a history lesson, just as much as it is a concert. And I think that's important. How did we get here? How did somebody decide at some point in time that these set of instruments are going to get together and they're going to play? It's an interesting thing. There's so many instruments that just didn't make it. The evolution has hit the instruments and they just didn't make it, right? So how have we arrived at these set of instruments playing this type of music in this style? I think it's going to be a really fun concert, and I'm actually looking very forward to it. So
yeah, I think it's going to be great. And what I really appreciate about Desert Winds, because I have performed with, for lack of a better word, community bands before, and a lot of times there's a social mission. There was a band in LA that I played with. I think it started out as a LGBTQI community band, but then just became a community band because a lot of the other bands, and so it was a very mixed group of people. It was a really great group of people and a lot of fun, but the level and the repertoire, it was not what I would call art music, right? And that's kind of a loaded term too, but I can't think of a better term, right? And what I really appreciate about what you're doing is that you're commissioning new works. You're playing really some of the best and most sort of deep music written for wind orchestra. And there are these composers like David Maslenka, for example, and I know you have several others that you've programmed who are writing, music that is the equivalent of a symphony for wind orchestra, and they're largely unknown in the symphonic world because they don't write for strings and they don't get programmed on orchestra concerts.
Right.
But there is this body of repertoire that is invisible to most people because they've never been exposed to it, and I really appreciate that we're not doing the Sousa marches. We're not doing the sort of medleys from Broadway shows or whatever it might be. We're really doing serious music by serious composers that was really written for this ensemble.
Yeah, this idea in wind symphony, wind ensemble music, and we won't go into a debate on why which of those ensembles is named differently. It's all a concert band. At the end of the day, we shouldn't shy away from that term. It somehow reduces it to the orchestra. And a lot of people look at concert band literature and concert bands as not being equivalent to an orchestra, but there's nothing more American than a concert band. It's like the concert band, the concept of the march. We do marches on Veterans Day, though, right? So we do perform marches. But the whole principle behind the wind ensemble, when it started at Eastman School of Music with Frederick Fennell, you're looking at 1950, 1955. People were transcribing for bands before that. We do have the early pieces from Holst for band, so the two suites and some Ray Vaughan Williams. But there's also a lot of transcriptions going on because the bands wanted to be treated with the same respect, and there wasn't a lot of music out there. So we were transcribing all of these pieces. Part of my degree at UNLV was transcribing a piece from orchestra to band. It's a concept that we don't even need to do anymore. We don't need to play that music. We need to play music for us, because a symphony orchestra has a certain timbre and essence to it. It evokes a different type of emotion. And most symphony conductors don't go to band concerts. And they should, right? I have not been able to get any of our symphony conductors to come to a Desert Winds concert, nor have they probably ever attended a wind orchestra concert at UNLV. And this idea in the string community that, okay, we need the wind players when we need them, but we're the orchestra, right? But a band is an orchestra. A band is still important. And composers that are writing music right now, their sonorities and emotionally evoking moments in wind and percussion music that cannot be evoked with strings. There just is. We know this because of those transcriptions, right? We know that a band cannot play as a string section in most situations. Now, there are some great transcriptions that sound in some ways better, right? And even if we look at Hindemith, who wrote the Symphony B flat for band first and then transcribed it for orchestra, the band version is the one that gets played, not the orchestra version, even though it is Hindemith. And so I don't even know if I've seen an orchestra program that in years. I'd love to see an orchestra play some Hindemith, the Hindemith in Symphony in B flat. But it's just interesting because we have incredible composers that are writing music about this moment and things that are happening. Just this fall, we played a piece called Lament with Familiar Ruins, which was this composer, his house caught on fire and his animals and his horses died in the fire. I mean, most of us cannot relate to that at all. But if the composer can evoke the sense of fear and dread and pain in a piece of music, you're going to feel that. Every single person in that concert felt the emotion and the intensity of what composer Kyle Green had gone through. And so if you're listening and you're a band director, look at Kyle Green's music. He's written so much really amazing music for middle school and high school band. He's published with Robert W. Smith Publications, RWS Music. So not to plug, but to plug, because composers, they need to make a living, right? And his music's incredible. Viet Quang, who is now a professor at UNLV in composition. I could not believe that he moved here and joined the faculty at UNLV. I was just so pleased and so excited. And so he has written some of the most inherently artistically life mirroring music that we've experienced in the last 20 years. And I just kudos to him because we're going to be programming his renewal, which is for percussion quartet and wind band next year. We've just never done it, but we've played we did Sound and Smoke. We did his piece Moth in the fall. As soon as we found out he was moving to town, I was like, let's add this piece. Let's do a dedication and welcome. There's just a lot of people. Michael Torkey, just really incredible orchestral composer, living in town, lives in Vegas. I think he still lives in Vegas. They're just really contributing to making sure that we're remembered as a people. If aliens were to come down, I said this in every podcast I've done, so I didn't know I was going to get this worked in, but if aliens were to come to Earth today and there were none of us were left, all the humans were gone, where do we want the aliens to look to get the truth and the honesty about who we were and what we were like? Do we want them to watch any of the news channels? We don't. We want them to go straight to the art and the music, because the artists and the musicians and all of the creative people in our world have left a lasting, life-mirroring impression of what we're like. And if we want people to know the truth, the musicians and the artists will always mark the truth in history. And so I think that's a vitally important, and it just goes back to community. And Viet Quang is doing that. Kyle Green is doing that. All of these composers are writing into permanent memory where we are as a society. And I think it's vitally important. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I had no idea Michael Torkey was here. He's a great composer.
Yep.
Also, I think has synesthesia. Did you know this?
Yes. So,
along with Olivier Messiaen. So synesthesia is a mental condition where your sensory synapses cross over. And so people can actually hear and taste colors, or when they see numbers, they might get a certain image or whatever. So it's really fascinating because he will write pieces where he will say this piece is green or this piece is vibrant blue. So cool. We should have coffee with him if he's around.
Yes.
But also, yeah, I mean, and they're writing some great music. I mean, I know that John Corleone was commissioned several years ago to write a piece for band, and he was sort of like framing it as, I didn't want to do it, but they kept upping their offer, and they finally paid me enough money that I did it. But he wrote this amazing piece called Circus Maximus,
Yes.
which is just stunning. And I think that what draws a lot of younger composers and newer composers to writing for a wind orchestra is that it's pretty. There's not a lot, as you say, there's not a lot of deep repertoire. We don't have Beethoven symphonies written for wind orchestra, and so they can get many performances. I think in the symphonic community, they do a really good job of commissioning a new work, but getting other orchestras to play that work again is where they really fall down. And that's what's so important for a composer to make a living, and to also get the exposure they need, is to have that second, third, fourth, and 20th performance of their work.
Yeah, it always goes back to education. Like, orchestras, professional orchestras, community orchestras will have education initiatives on their website. Look, we played a kids concert and we introduced all the instruments. Well, that's good. What are you doing the rest of the year?
Yeah.
What are you doing the rest of the year? If we were sometimes, and I mean, even with some of our orchestras in town, we don't listen to the community. We are always concerned about consumership and consuming music and having enough people donating to put the concerts on. Smith Center is very expensive to perform in, but we've never really returned back to the idea that we have to educate our community. Our community doesn't know anything other than Beethoven.
Right.
So our orchestras and some wind bands have abdicated their role as educators. Mm-hmm. A concert is an education. A concert is a should be life mirroring and life changing experience, an uplifting experience, reminding you of your humanity, what makes us more alike than the things that make us different. That's the overarching purpose. And orchestras are educational institutions first.
Yeah.
They don't want to be, but they are. And so if people are not consuming the new composer's music, if orchestras are not playing the new composer's music, then they're not listening to the pulse of their community. And we want to make sure that we are constantly listening to the pulse of the community. Where are they? What are they consuming? What do they want to hear? Now, sometimes you'll have, there was this one concert, my favorite concert ever was the Metallica concert. I believe it was the London Symphony. Michael Kamen was the composer. He was a movie composer. He died in his 50s, way too young, but he composed all these arrangements. And then I never liked Metallica. All my friends in high school loved Metallica, and I didn't like Metallica. But then I watched this concert with the London Symphony, and these pieces are really, 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 really deep. And you don't get that until you start hearing all the different colors and the orchestra bringing that out. But that opened my mind to what was possible. And I think these newer sounds, they're harder for orchestras to necessarily create, just because an orchestral musician has been trained in all of the standard lit. They've played all of this stuff before, right? And the newer music is harder to take on because the rhythm and the pulse and the timbres and all of the essence of what makes music modern and new is so different from what they're used to playing. And I think that we just need to do a bigger deep dive. The band world had to do that, right? We had to do that. We didn't have a choice. If we wanted to get away from the transcriptions, we had to do that. So we've done that. We're very comfortable with all of these different aspects of new music making, because everything is new for the most part. And I think the orchestras need to take that on a little bit. And I'm not saying that every orchestra doesn't. There's some orchestras that do embrace the newness. There's an orchestra, can't remember, the Bozeman Symphony, right? So they just got nominated for an Emmy, performing a piece of music, the Heritage Euphonium Concerto, that was written for band. It's been transcribed for orchestra by composer Anthony Barfield. He lives in New York City. We were at University of Alabama together, and they got an Emmy nomination for the performance of this originally band piece, right? And the audience and the feedback that they've gotten from that performance has just been unbelievable. People want to consume something they can relate to, and they can't relate to Beethoven. right? Like, we're so far away from Beethoven, and as amazing and miraculous as Beethoven was, he's not one of us. He's not walking amongst us. We will never be able to fully, and people will pontificate. They'll get on stage and pontificate about Beethoven and talk about all of the stuff that Beethoven did and all the things, but nobody lived with Beethoven. Nobody was there. Nobody, understood how agonizing it had to have been deaf and composing music. Like, we are not capable, especially if we don't know what that feels like. We will never be able to relate to that. And not living at the same time makes it difficult. But living with these composers, I would love to see more orchestras take on the new literature. And the other music is really important, but I think music that is mirroring what's happening now in society has a far-reaching, more important purpose than anything else that they program. So,
yeah. And that's really important. And to that end, I know that you have some goals with Desert Winds of commissioning new works. And have you commissioned new works already? And what have those been like that you've done?
So we generally, our commissioning is a matter of getting on a commissioning project. We the Kevin Day Concerto for Wind Ensemble, we were on that commissioning project, and we'll likely be programming that piece next year. But it's not necessary. We do commissioning projects not because we're going to play the piece in its exclusivity. We program and we commission music and get on these projects so that we can fund composers, right? This is a composer should be able to make a living writing music that is artistic and for the medium. And so in supporting that, we get on these commissioning projects. We've commissioned in the past, and the commission ended up being free. So we commissioned Julie Giroux. Everybody, for the most part, knows the story. She wrote a piece about my father, who had passed away in 2014. Desert Winds made it into the Midwest Conference, and we performed there in 2016. And I knew that I wanted a piece. The entire program around Midwest was Alabama composers and teachers that I had had. And so everybody was related to my background and my education. We went as far as in the program, every single member of the Desert Winds gave us a list of their teachers, and we listed every single teacher of every single member of the ensemble in the program and thanked them, because we are the sum of all of our experiences. We're not just our failures and our successes. We're the sum of every experience, and every thread in our quilt of life is vital and important. We have to remember those people. So commissioning Julie Giroux to write the piece about my father, and it was a 4-hour conversation in the middle of the night on the phone. And she, at the end of it, she said, can you do me a favor? And I said, well, sure. And she said, can you let me write this for free for you? I would like to give this to you and your mom. And
wow.
And the piece is called The Hearthstone, and it's just so, it's emotional for me. But I don't think I've ever been more moved by an experience, just because every detail that I told her about my father and my mom and my upbringing somehow made it into the piece. It could be just that I am creating that idea, but I don't think so. Her music often comes from another place. It doesn't sound like anybody else, and it tugs at your heartstrings, and it just really grabs you. And so she gives a lot to animal foundations and things like that. She has a lot of different things that she personally wants to support, but she supports people, and when I think about what's really important about music education and performance and everything that we do, Julie actually summarizes that. Julie Giroux would summarize pretty much for everybody what it would be to be a great human being who gives back and is constantly working with every minute of every day that she has to make sure that the world is a better place tomorrow than it was today. And I think that's something that we can all take from her, and just dealing with the composition aspect of it and the commissioning of the work. There's just nothing like it, being a part of that. So.
That's amazing. And next year, you are interested in composing a piece that is about Las Vegas. Is that right?
Right. So we are currently working on a project with a composer, Caleb Hamner. So he wrote a piece called Streets of the City a few years back. And the piece was really intense. And it just, if you can imagine driving through Las Vegas or any major city, you hear all of these sounds of workers and street performers. And it's just this smorgasbord of just craziness. And it was just a really cool piece. He had written a string piece that was loosely based on the underground of Vegas, right? The underbelly of Vegas. And so he's currently developing that into a piece that is called Vegas Underground, or will have some type of relationship to Vegas Underground. And the idea that, and I haven't actually seen the people, but there are articles where people have written about people living under the Strip. And so it's just really interesting. We have a huge homeless population, but apparently there's a little city that lives and resides under the Las Vegas Strip. And, you know, even if it's not true, what an interesting concept to have a completely different city going on under the ground, and then having Vegas being what it is on top. I mean, there's nothing more Vegas than that. That's just Vegas, right? The underbelly. And so he's writing this piece based on that idea and that concept. And we don't have really a date for performance yet, but it's coming. It's going to be really cool.
Great. Well, you know, when I moved back to Las Vegas, a little over 15, 16 months ago, maybe now, I reached out to you early on because I really wanted to be part of what you were doing. And I had really good memories of playing with Desert Winds and being like, wow, for a largely unpaid group, this is really very high level. And the music is like good music that we're playing. And I was absolutely eager to get back in touch with you and to get more involved. And so it's been a joy helping you build Making Music Matter Foundation. And I'm really excited about participating in Bandcamp Reimagined this year. And again, the best way to donate, if you're interested in helping us get more scholarship kids to Bandcamp this summer, is to go to makingmusicmatterfoundation.org. It's all one word, and you'll see a donate button there. Anything else you want to share with us before we close, Chuck?
No, that just everybody that is watching and listening, think about something you can do to support art and music, right? Think about something that you can do more. Just one little tiny step forward. If we're all taking a little bit, we're moving closer to what it means to be community and what it means to be supporting music and art in our community. What more can you do? Ask yourself that question, answer it, and it doesn't have to be huge. But if everybody takes on and does an incremental small amount to improve community each day, what kind of world would we live in? Like I look forward to that moment when people are so inspired again that they start giving and just really supporting what it means to be a community. And we can do that in Vegas. That's why I haven't left. I want to stay here. I want what other communities have. We deserve that. And even if people don't even know what that is, they're going to learn, because stubborn. I'm stubborn. I'm from Alabama. I'm just like Susan, my mama. I just like her, and I won't let it go. We are going to have a community, and everybody's invited at the table. So that's where we are. Thanks, Michael.
That's great. What a great closing thought. And again, makingmusicmatterfoundation.org. Reach out to, you can find Chuck on Facebook at Chuck McGuire, or you can like and join the Facebook page for Making Music Matter Foundation, and find me on Empowering Musicians. If you haven't joined our group yet, please do join. And I look forward to next week. And thank you again, Chuck, for your time, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks.